Hello, everyone. It's Mr. Nobody bringing you another episode of Making Nobody Happy. And today I want to talk about the burden of consciousness. Sounds like a very heavy topic, but we're going to try to at least have some fun with it, get some understanding from it. So it just seems to me that one difficulty that I really see in my life, of everyone around me, that everyone seems to be having, is just this large sense of existential dread and fear that comes from reading the daily news. I know it stresses me out. I know it stresses my wife out, stresses out so many people that I know. And, humans are funny creatures. They have amazing powers, not the least of which is their own consciousness, their own ability to know what kind of creature they are. And this knowledge gives us amazing power, but it also places a terrible burden on us, the burden of our consciousness. And deer live fairly simple lives. I've got a lot of deer here. They're walking around just outside that window every single day. Deer eat, they have babies, they get sick, they age, and they get eaten by other animals. Sometimes around here they get hit by cars. They live fairly short, simple lives, but also, from our perspective, very difficult, futile, insecure, and relatively meaningless lives. What makes deer able to live these lives of a constant search for food and temporary avoidance of death? What makes them able to stand it and not collapse from fear or depression or ennui? Simply put, they don't have to think about it. They're only aware of what's in front of them, the immediate dangers, needs, pleasures, risks, and goals. Now, there's a scene in the movie Men in Black where Agent K criticizes Agent J for making a scene, causing mayhem and destruction by firing his weapon openly in the public pursuit of their quarry. And Agent J reminds K that the world is at stake. And K tells him the world is always at stake. There's always some huge threat looming over humanity and threatening to destroy it. And what lets the world keep running, what lets people go about their lives, which provides the stability needed so the Men in Black can even exist to confront these threats, is that they don't know about it. They don't think about it all the time. And that's the burden of consciousness in action. The truth is, there's so many challenges and dangers in the world that any one person seeing them all clearly would be immediately overwhelmed. There's no way one person can fix all that. There's no way one person can even contain it in their minds and not just be completely mentally and emotionally overcome. We're just not designed for such a burden. I don't know if you've ever read the book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, or listened to the radio drama, but there's a torture device that is used to try and kill one of the characters. And all it is a little box that you go into, and it just shows you the entire universe, all of it, with a little sign pointing at you that says, "You are here." And that eradicates the minds of the people. That's another pop culture amusing example of what I'm talking about. We're not huge. We're not as big as the universe. And there are a few ways that we handle this problem. One solution is we outsource the problem in tiny pieces to other people. As a child, I was always amused when I would read my comic books when Uncle Scrooge would pay Donald Duck to worry for him. Scrooge would expect Donald to moan and groan and tear out his hair so Scrooge could sit down calmly and get his work done. It's a hilarious picture, but it's not that different from what we actually do. We specialize. We hand off tasks to other people so they can focus on those problems, so we can focus on our own, so we can get our work done. We distribute the psychic burden of life and all of its dangers across the spectrum of human experience and ability. And some people are indeed much better at facing and solving certain kinds of problems than other people. We also outsource a lot of our concerns to impersonal forces. God, the universe, the free market, karma, however you want to conceive of those laws that you see that govern the way the world is structured. Those laws of justice will ensure that generally bad ideas and actions will fail and die, and good ones will prosper. The world should go the way it should go in the long run. Conscientiousness will lead to success. Foolishness will be revealed in its own failure. Basically, that the cosmic scales of justice will operate, and good and evil will receive their just rewards. Mostly. We most people believe that that is the general trend of the universe as a whole, and the people who don't generally have a very hard time living in the universe and carrying the burden of consciousness. We believe that at some macroeconomic scale, there's some kind of cosmic justice, that there is some sense to the universe, some sense and logic to like what actions lead to what ends, that the world isn't just completely arbitrary and unjust. Because if the world is completely arbitrary and unjust, then there's really no point in bearing the burden of consciousness. It has no benefit because knowing our situation doesn't grant us any control over it or understanding of it that we can use in any meaningful way. It just allows us to see the senselessness and helplessness and injustice and random arbitrariness of our situation. So if indeed the world is fundamentally random and meaningless, it would be far better to be like a deer and at least not be aware of it, so that we can keep our focus on the only level that actually matters, the immediate. So let's just assume for now that life in the universe aren't just a completely cruel and senseless joke. Because if they are, there really isn't anywhere to go from here. There's nothing else to talk about. So, assuming that that isn't the case, how then do we manage the portion of the burden of consciousness that is our part to bear? And what is it? These are very relevant questions that people have actually thought about a lot over the years, and they've developed different answers for. Now, government and the law are two of our main instruments for dealing with the existential burdens of life. We don't carry the burden of maintaining justice frontier style in our own personal lives that much. We don't have to all carry swords or guns on our hips to defend our borders daily with personal violence and force. And in our big, complex world, it'd be pretty hard to do it that way and effectively recognize and respond to every danger and need that the world contains. As much as it is a fun idea, and as much as we do need to do it somewhat, like you're going to have a pretty hard time just walking around with a gun wherever you are and having that be your solution to all the problems and complexity of the world. So as much as we like the idea of the lone gunslinger bringing justice and order to the world, the actual world is so big and so complex, and the ways that it needs to be dealt with are so varied and complicated that it's just not practical. It's not enough. It's too much to expect of any one person or one tool. So we create institutions, structures, laws. We choose people who will specialize in administering and enforcing various parts of those laws and the separate jobs and stages needed to make them work. And we trust those structures and people to do their jobs so we can get on with ours. And hopefully that all works. And we have good laws that are well designed to map onto reality and provide mechanisms to respond to the needs and the problems that arise. And hopefully we have people in those jobs that are well suited in their abilities to see and deal with those challenges. That's how you get a good functioning society, one that makes it easier for all of its citizens to bear the burden of consciousness and allows us each to maximize our potential. We each contribute according to our abilities and strengths, and we're protected in our weaknesses and blind spots by the strengths and insights of others. So that's cooperation. So in the old days, people had to bear a much larger total share of the burden of consciousness by themselves. Sometimes that even meant a completely solipsistic existence of lone humans alone bearing the weight of the world. But the smallest fundamental unit where we came together to share and distribute those burdens and really tackle them in a complex way was the family. Pioneers basically were their own government. They were their own town, their own police, their own education system, their own social and healthcare system, their own army. They were much more on their own, so they had to provide for themselves. But in a family, you can basically generate the seed of all those things, the beginnings of every one of these huge things. They all exist in the family. But of course, doing it on their own like that, man, it took a lot of work and time and effort to accomplish things because you had to do everything. You had to be everything. Maybe you had one person to compliment you and help take some of the burdens off you and to balance, their strengths with yours and mutual protection and relief. Maybe more, but at least you want to have one person. That doesn't sound like a lot, but the power of the smallest human society shouldn't be underestimated. Those tiny societies, those families, those little clusters of settlers and little villages, they kept us alive and growing and ultimately built the whole world that we now enjoy. And we have a great respect for those people, or we should, because they were able to do something like that. Each family was like a city unto itself. Each settlement was like a country unto itself. What they accomplished, considering how much they had to handle, just absolutely amazing. That's why I love reading those pioneer stories. They really are fantastic. Now, they did have one big advantage on their side. The total scale of the problems they're aware of, or at least the total number of problems they were aware of or concerned with, was relatively small. It was intimate. They had to be everything to everyone, but fortunately, their everyone in this case meant just the 6 people in their own family, or just the 10 families in their settlement. The bigger the community got, the less they had to be everything. So you can see with this happening, a kind of law of human consciousness emerges. The larger and more spaced out the group, the more narrow the focus of our consciousness becomes. The smaller and closer and more intimate that group, the wider the focus of our consciousness becomes. So we can be much more specialized in a big society, whereas in a small one, you have to be very generalized. And if you've ever been part of running a business or an organization, it follows the exact same principle. So our mind works kind of like a camera lens. It gets wider, but as it gets wider, you get a shallower depth of focus. It gives you a detailed look at things close up. Now, for a larger number of objects that are more widely spread, this deeper focus, the depth of your focus expands, but the area of focus narrows. So if you ever used a zoom lens, you back it out wide, you can see things close really well, wide angle, but very shallow depth. Whereas you go the other way, you zoom out, it actually shrinks what you can see to a very narrow and specialized area, but you can see a whole lot of distance and actually an enormous number of things in that. You can see stuff from the foreground all the way to the background. Our minds work kind of like that. It's a very funny thing. So, just get out a camera with the zoom lens sometime and play with it a bit. You'll see what I mean. Pioneers lived with their minds on a portrait lens or a macro setting, whereas your modern white collar worker is thinking more like a telephoto lens. So our mind, just like our eyes, seems to be built to adapt its focus this way. You'd need a pretty amazing camera to be able to take in a wide and a narrowly detailed view of infinite focus at the same time. And most of us are just average consumer models. We aren't built to process and take in that much data at once. So human minds actually have this same mechanism built into them to help them handle what they can focus on. When you're going to see things close up in great detail, it's going to be shallow. Anyway, you get it. So just like camera lenses, why does that happen? Well, it happens because it helps us live with and adjust to the needs of life and to our own limitations and to our own situation, to what we're dealing with. In small groups where burdens can't easily be shared, we take a wide view of the world, but with a very shallow or narrow focus. Now, in a large group where burdens can be easily shared and there can be a lot of views on something, we take a very narrow angle of view with a very long depth of focus. But that also means there's two intersections where things can easily start to go wrong and become a problem for creatures like us. Small group, narrow angle, and large group, wide angle. Basically, it's like trying to take your family photos from 6 feet away with a telephoto lens. That's not going to work great. That narrow focus, when you're in that small, intimate setting, it just doesn't work. Or if you try to take detailed shots of a distant landscape with a macro lens, it's not designed for that. You have this wide angle of view, but your depth is not going to capture it. You're combining the opposites in a way that doesn't work. Now, I think that the dangers of having a small group, narrow angle, are fairly well understood because the consequences are obvious and they're immediate. If you're a pioneer and you take a narrow and limited view of what you need to worry about and what you need to do, you're going to get in trouble really fast. If you only concern yourself with food, or only concern yourself with protection, or family, or building a house, if you focus on just one of those things and you ignore the others, things are going to collapse really fast. People have lots of needs, and you need to be addressing all of them and keeping them all in mind and balance. So it's no good having plenty of water if you freeze to death. It's no good having lots of children if you can't feed them. So that kind of broad, close, narrow, that doesn't work. A strong house isn't useful if you don't get your crops planted. And if you're spending lots of times thinking about distance things related to any one of those needs, if you're trying to take a telephoto look at just one and you're putting everything into that, like the general agricultural conditions, and you're spending half your time working on techniques to adapt to them, well, that's not great, because meanwhile your house is crumbling and there are wolves circling you. You haven't got blankets or medicine. No one's watching your kids. No one's teaching them how to take care of themselves. You actually need a shallower view. You're not spending your time well or applying your focus and your efforts properly. And so you're heading for a disaster. I think most people can grasp why that would be a problem fairly intuitively. We'd say have some sense of proportion, get some perspective. That's not what you need to focus on right now. You can't just tunnel into that one thing and go so far with that one thing. Those are all common corrections that we would say to that kind of approach. Adjust your lens, we're trying to tell people. Adjust your lens. You need to be paying attention to more things and not dig in so narrowly and deeply on this one thing. Now, where the dangers and weaknesses are much harder to see is at the other extreme, at the level of big group, wide angle, deep depth, wide angle. Now, before I get into it, I should mention there's challenges at every level. Just because it's a necessary adaptation to develop a wider mental focus if you're in a small society, and you're able to develop a narrower one in a large society, doesn't mean it's not going to be work. That both of those aren't going to be hard, and that they won't come with risks and problems, and you won't make mistakes, you won't miss things. Obviously, people are going to have trouble doing both of those things, and they're both going to have their problems. Now, having to be everything in a small society dilutes our abilities and attention, and it forces us to address problems we might be poorly suited at solving. And the tendency to silo ourselves in a large society means we might lose sight of concerns outside of our specialized viewpoint that we really should be more aware of and contributing to. These are sort of things where even if you've got your focus right, it doesn't mean you might not be without problems. Like I said, maybe there's going to be these sorts of problems endemic to even taking the right approach. So yes, there are great opportunities to broaden our skill set or hone our skill set or ourselves in either of these situations. But those opportunities do come with costs, namely what you lose at the other end. If you specialize too much, you risk becoming too narrow. If you broaden too much, you risk becoming too diffused. So life becomes this kind of balancing act, taking advantage of the chance to hone and focus our skill set and personality and set aside some of the broader spectrum of the burden of consciousness so we can dig into our strongest niche while also remembering that the rest of the spectrum of consciousness is still out there and not becoming so focused on our area that we become blind and helpless in all these other areas. And maybe something changes and all of a sudden that becomes a problem. It is still important to remember to broaden our skill sets and expand ourselves, or at least respect the perspectives and contributions of others and not get too myopic. Life becomes this constant push and pull between focus and balance, and somehow we need to find a way to make use of the benefits of both these approaches while acknowledging our own limitations as humans. It's very hard for us to be everything in all places at all times and see everything and do everything. So we're always going to struggle, no matter where we are, between these two focal extremes. But let's go back to the area that I mentioned before. A large group situation, a landscape situation. We're seeing big, we're seeing far, we're seeing deep, distant, combined with a wide angle and a shallow depth of field. So using a portrait lens, basically, to do telephoto photography. And I think that's actually something we're doing a lot these days. I'll have to explain. So the problem is the world contains so much information and we have so much access to it now, but it's being so shallowly diffused. So we can't take in and respond to all the information that's actually available to us. We can't process it intellectually and emotionally. So we've built in filters and selective mental structures that they tell us what to pay attention to and what to ignore, and they help us select from the available information, which is almost infinite, and it helps us hone it down to find what we should pay attention to, what we shouldn't pay attention to. It helps us fit it into our existing mental schema, basically our internal story and values, the things that matter to us. And a lot of those skills are actually just innate, this mental processing that goes on. It's innate, it's built into our emotions, it's built into the way that we think. And it varies a bit also with our personality. Certain types of people notice more of certain kinds of things. So my first daughter, when she was a baby, was so interested in people, and she still is. They're everything that matters to her. She would look you right in the eyes and just constantly watch you all the time. And she would get so upset if she couldn't see anyone. Now that was fun, but that meant she was also a lot of work because she was so relationally needy. She had almost no interest in toys or objects or exploring places. She wanted constant attention and personal interaction. Objects that weren't people barely even existed for her. Places that didn't have people in them had absolutely no interest for her. Now my second daughter, this shows personality difference, just innate, because they were this from pre-verbal, from born, from tiny little baby. My second daughter was completely different. It was very hard to get her to meet your eyes, and she was often distracted by other things. She would be happy for very long periods of time just staring at the world, or digging her hands in the dirt, or just listening to music, or just laying on her back and kicking her feet up in the air and looking at them. You could drive around in the car and forget that my second daughter was even in there. You could never do that with my older daughter. From the moment they were born, they were processing information very differently. They were assigning different values to different types of things, different types of information, and they responded to them very differently. And they've each developed very unique strengths and weaknesses and needs and desires and insights and abilities as a result. And they often have a very hard time understanding each other or appreciating each other because they want and they even see such different things. But they're also a wonderful complement to each other. And I've told them that, if you can ever learn to properly understand and appreciate each other, you'll have really learned a great skill and you'll have gained some real wisdom that'll make you a bigger person than you are. You'll really have become somebody. Or at least if they can get through life without killing each other by the time they grow up, they'll have also learned some key skills. Now, that kind of filtering that I see both of them doing, that's an innate and necessary part of the human mind. Everyone is filtering the world through the lenses of human perception, of their culture, of their personality, and through these underlying built-in things that just tell us what is actually worth paying attention to. We're all doing that all the time. We have to do it. It's, maybe you've heard other people talk about this before, that one of the hardest things in developing AI and robotics has been teaching them what information is relevant, what is worth paying attention to, by doing that, we realized that most of that process is defined by meaning and purpose and goals and these things. You have to have some. What is it? What is it designed to do? Kind of like it's interesting. I was reading a thing. They managed to CAT scan dogs. They had to train them very carefully to lay still. What they found is dogs don't even really seem to see objects that much. Like, they really don't seem to be paying attention to objects or necessarily even people in some ways that specifically. They see things in terms of actions. They see behaviors. They see actionable things and things being done. Their world is structured around, what is that thing doing? What is happening? What should I be doing? They have this really distinct way of seeing the world and responding to it. We all have these filters that structure our information, and a lot of it is structured according to goals and needs. But in our modern world, we've come up with some really interesting inventions that have changed our filters, and in some ways blown right through them. We have the internet, we have social media, newspapers, television. Now, all of these are essentially information collectors and distributors, and they have enormous reach. They're able to gather information for us from the far corners of the world and deliver it to our lap, stuff that you could never in a lifetime have reached before. And we have thousands of them, thousands upon thousands of options, and each one of them can see farther than you could ever imagine seeing. And their coverage, how much stuff they can give you, is just insane. They're just pervasive. They can wrap themselves around us. They can define and filter a whole world of information for us. Now, it's gotten more and more subspecialized too. So you can even come down to just a specific type of information. You get an infinite world's worth selected and delivered to you and wrapped all around us. And now the rise of targeted and entertainment news, editorial news, papers, websites, online groups, TV shows that cater specifically to our tastes. Those wrap us in an expansive world, but with a very unitary focus and dimension. And this is what I mean. It's landscape photography with a macro lens is basically what technology lets us do. It lets us do something that we really as humans couldn't do before. It basically lets us have such a narrow focus, but with vast gathering abilities. So, at the same time that our scope of information has been so vastly expanded from like the people I can immediately see and talk to the entire world's worth of what people could find out. Now, at the same time as that happened, technology and our lifestyle of flexibility have actually allowed us to silo ourselves more and more efficiently. They've also given us means of communication and access and action that remove us, or well, they connect us, but they connect us at a further and further and further distance from the actual people and events that we're being connected to. The actions we take, the dangers that we hear about, the results of the actions we take, the reactions of the people that we've affected, and the results and resolutions of the problems that we concern ourselves with. All of a sudden, those are way, way further away. It's not this person sitting next to me. It's something in an almost infinite distance. And yet that's what we've connected our understanding, our knowledge, our emotional reactions, and our actions, and the feedback from those actions, and seeing what results from them, that we've connected ourselves to something so far away. The internet allows us to gather a selection of the juiciest and most provocative news from across a nation of 350 million people and funnel that direct to our individual doors. And it lets us shoot off comments and reactions to those events back at those people and at many other people who we will never meet or know or likely have anything to do with, who we only see, or we're really only seeing the tiniest slice of them, the tiniest, shallowest, most macro slice of them. We're not seeing the majority of everything there, just this one little selected bit. We don't have to see their faces. We don't have to maintain a working relationship with these people. We don't have to live next door to them or in the same house with them, or go to work every day with them. We don't have to have anything to do with these people ever, again, because they're just names in a ladder of text. So what's been the result of these huge changes to the way that information gathering and reaction, the whole structuring of our informational world works? What's been the result? Never mind how it happened. Well, one result, it seems to have made us a lot crazier, seems to have made us a lot more partisan. It seems to have made us more afraid of each other, more angry at each other, more threatened by each other. It's made us much less able to actually understand or trust one another. It's made us look at the behavior online. It has definitely made us ruder and less civil and more easily angered. Partly because it's just so simple, it's so shallow. You're missing all of the complexities of all the things that went into our interactions with each other. It's really also raised our perception of threats, and for many different reasons, but even just part of it is just the breadth of threats we can see, how far away we can pull them from, but also the simplifying of them, the narrowness of them, the decontextualizing of them, the pulling the threat out of the situation and just dumping it into ours. At this immense distance. It's not something it's not a situation we're overall lodged in, which we used to be. And so we evaluated threat in a much more holistic and interconnected kind of way. So you can see that our threat response to things that we read and that we see online, way higher than seems reasonable. I mean, and the internet favors it. The algorithms favor it. Outrage and fear and self-righteousness and violent resistance and incredulity at the idiocy of others are the prevailing emotional states of the internet. And yes, there are many reasons, but I think at least some of them are the reasons why the results have been so exaggerated are just structural. They are that way because society is currently arranged in opposites to how we naturally process information, to how we adjust and calibrate our perspective and our reactions to the way that we're normally embedded in our environment. And the way that we assess our needs and our threats and our situation in that environment. Like, we are literally not naturally embedded in the environments that our minds now inhabit. Human beings seem to have been designed to process information and respond to needs and threats and goals at a scale of maybe 150 people. That's sort of one of the estimates that's out there. That seems to be a natural, maximum size for a meaningful human community. There's only so many relationships of any depth that you can maintain. There's only so many connections you can really effectively manage. Once you get past that level, your interactions are governed much more by just social structures and impersonal forces than any actual in-depth personal community. It just becomes politeness. It's not like I really know anything about that person. They don't really know anything about me. We just sort of navigate past each other. We don't really see each other in any great detail, and we do it with just these sort of algorithmic ways of responding. These convenient formulas, convenient structural formulas, social structures, because that's about as much as we can handle. We can really only connect to 100 or so people. So, and part of it is because so much of our communication, and this is so much what we're missing now, now that we've changed our means of communication so much of our communication is based around subtleties, tone of voice, facial expressions, body language. Our faces and our bodies are communication machines. They help tell our story. They humanize us to one another. And there's also a very different social environment that exists when you actually know and have to live with someone in person in the same physical space. You see them, you hear them, you smell them, you touch them, and that's so true just with the people in my community, in my neighborhood, people that I just run to the grocery store, even more with people who you have to live with in person, in the same physical space, when you have to actually live with someone another, and you occasionally need one another. You have real connections to those people. One of the hallmarks of community is the shared psychic burdens model, and also this longer term relationship. All of that's, so much of that is just gone over the internet, so much of that interdependence, and even like forced interdependence of, well, I need someone to be doing the checkout, I need someone to be pushing carts, I need someone to be doing the construction. I'm forced to inhabit and share those spaces with these people because I need them. I can't just take them for granted. They can't be expelled. We all sort of need each other. We live in this kind of cooperation. We're all sharing this burden together. We all have to inhabit the same space. There are some people that you just can't treat people who are in your own house or in your community. That is part of why there is this burden of politeness to the way you treat people, because you live with them. You actually have to live with them. You can't expect a relationship to last or prosper. You don't treat people with a certain amount of respect and understanding. And it's proximity to people that helps us achieve that positive social goal. We see people close up in detail as humans. We get a close, focused view on them that tempers how we treat them as representatives of our large group, long view personal perspectives. Now, I might be a liberal who dislikes and disagrees with conservatives, but I see and I know the guy who works in the lighting store, and although he's part of that large, long view group, I know him as a person close up in other detail with a plethora of other tiny details that humanize and complexify him. And so we have a good working relationship and respect for one another, partly because our relationship with one another is not merely limited to my knowledge of how we differ in this one area. We can learn to appreciate each other's viewpoints and see one another as actual sympathetic humans that might have good aspects to them and good thoughts and motivations beyond what my wide, shallow assessment of the greater group would indicate. The truth is, it's not clear that people were really meant to have their threat assessment reactions be the result of this exceptional gleaning from a massive group of extremely distant and diverse people and situations, of which all you will ever know is likely to be the tiny bit of editorialized information that was fed to you at a huge distance by a media outlet that profits in terms of clicks by feeding you the most provocative and alarming and outrageous material possible, framed to make it as compelling and necessary for you to read as possible, to speak to you in a unitary and simplified manner without all the complexity and extra information and relationships that make personal interactions so different. It's not really clear that we're really meant to get our idea of people from an enveloping shroud of distant electronic information instead of from real life encounters with people and places and situations that directly intersect with our own lives. Not that it isn't good to know about and touch a wider world, but we have fairly effectively subverted, like completely subverted, the natural structure of how we encounter the world through technology. We live inside worlds of our own creation and curation. All of our content is carefully selected by algorithms to perfectly match our impulses and desires and reinforce our ideas and prejudices, our preferences, our identity, our concerns. And that's not always a good thing.